It started with a single image of a cicada, black background, with simple white text. I was scrolling through a cryptography subreddit late at night, trying to distract myself from another evening of insomnia, when someone posted it. "Here's something interesting," they wrote, as if they didn't know the rabbit hole it would lead to. The message on the image was simple: "We are looking for highly intelligent individuals. This is a test." Below that, a string of random-looking numbers and letters, just sitting there like a dare. I don't know what made me save it to my desktop. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the voice in my head that said, "You've always been good at puzzles. Why not try? Let's put that master's degree to use." The key was hidden in the image's metadata, buried beneath its surface. At first, I thought the image was just a clever decoy, just white text on black, wanting you to waste hours chasing nothing. But when I opened it in a hex editor, the truth started to reveal itself. Among the strings of data, I found a clue, a URL leading to an unassuming page with an image of a duck. My stomach sank. Trolled asterisk, I thought, until I remembered something from an old forum post about steganography. The message wasn't in the image itself but within it, encoded. A free online tool exposed the hidden text, a long string that looked like gibberish at first glance, but resolved into another URL when decoded. By this point, I wasn't the only one working through the puzzles. Reddit was going wild online, the mystery spreading like wildfire. After the first couple puzzles were solved, it started to feel like there was a real mystery behind all of it. This wasn't just some clever college kid making puzzles to troll Reddit. There seemed to really be something to all of it. The second URL led to a page, just plain black text on white. "Congratulations," it read. "You've made it this far. But there's still a long way to go." Below the message was another string of text, a Caesar cipher. Shifting the letters back by a set number revealed another cryptic message, a reference to a line in the Mabinogion asterisk, an old collection of Welsh mythology. I didn't own a copy, but I found a scanned version online. My hands hovered over the keyboard, fumbling slightly as I searched for the passage. The solution wasn't in the words themselves but in the placement of the letters. A careful pattern revealed yet another URL. The next page wasn't as simple. Instead of text, it hosted an audio file, low and distorted. Spectrogram analysis, I learned about it during a deep dive into cryptography forums, transformed the sound into an image, a string of numbers that looked like GPS coordinates. By this time, I was obsessed. I punched the numbers into Google Maps, half expecting to end up in the middle of an ocean. Instead, they pointed to a street corner in Warsaw, Poland. Of course, I wasn't going to fly to Poland. Others working on the puzzle shared images of the clue they found, a laminated poster taped to a light pole, featuring the same black and white imagery and a QR code. Scanning the code led to another page, but this time it required a key to decrypt. That's when I realized the puzzles weren't just about intelligence. People in forums collaborated, sharing their progress as we pieced together the solutions. One solved cipher led to another set of coordinates, then another, spreading across the globe like a network. Each piece made us feel closer to answering the larger question. What is this, really? But the more I solved, the more I became obsessed. I decoded the PGP key that unlocked the next step. Then, the final puzzle cycle came. The final puzzle cycle felt different. It wasn't just a code to break or a text to decrypt, it was a test of patience and precision. The PGP key I'd received weeks earlier was the gatekeeper, verifying my identity and granting access to an unlisted Tor page. The page was bare, a single black screen with a string of numbers that had no immediate meaning. Hours turned into days as I chased down every possible lead, cross-referencing them with literature, mathematical sequences, even star charts. After several more puzzle cycles solved, with passages pulled from Agrippa by William Gibson, I found myself at, what I didn't know at the time, would be my final puzzle. Decoding it, using the Book of Soiga revealed an email address, plain and unspectacular. I sent a message, my hands trembling, and received a reply within seconds. "You have come far, but the journey is not over. Welcome." Then the page disappeared, and my screen went dark, leaving me staring at my own reflection, anxious to see what happens next. For a moment, I began to wonder if I had made some mistake and been kicked out, or worse, if the whole thing had just been one giant hoax. But as I sat and thought, I heard the faintest of clicks, and the light on my webcam turned on. Asterisk what the foo, asterisk I said quietly to myself, frozen in my chair. It only stayed on for a few seconds before clicking back off. Up until this point, I was going from goal to goal, obsession and curiosity fueling me. But with it now seemingly complete, the gratification was now wearing off, and a feeling of regret was slowly creeping in. Asterisk, was this all a waste of time? What did I just allow into my life? What if it is something illegal? Asterisk. That is the extent of what most people know about the mystery. But what most people don't know is that that was only the beginning. The very tip of the iceberg. They were being truthful. It was a test to find intelligent individuals. But if people knew what they truly wanted them for, nobody would have ever participated. Nothing more happened that day after the webcam incident. I convinced myself it had been nothing. A malfunction, or maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just the end of the puzzle, nothing. Perhaps I had messed something up along the way, missed a key clue, or I just wasn't chosen. Or maybe it had all been an elaborate hoax from the start. Something designed to mess with people like me, who are too obsessive to see reason. I told myself it was time to move on, maybe even take a break from Reddit altogether. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe again. I focused on the mundane, work, a few casual outings, the things I'd neglected for so long. My life went back to normal. It didn't last for long though. I was getting off work, walking home like usual. While walking, I started to notice a man in a black suit following behind me. He kept a steady pace, making every turn I made. It felt weird, but I shrugged it off. There are lots of people who walk in a city, after all. I picked up some food at the grocery store on the way, nothing special. But as I walked in, I noticed a second guy in a suit standing near the entrance. He didn't look like he was shopping, just standing there, waiting, staring in my direction. I began to feel creeped out, but tried to push it out of my mind and do my shopping. While I was in one of the aisles, I saw another man in a suit. He walked past the aisle I was in and looked directly at me, then kept going. He didn't stop or say anything, just walked by, but it felt off. By this time, I started getting uncomfortable, positive I was being watched. I hurried through the rest of my shopping and went to the checkout. I left the store, trying not to think about it, but as I walked down the street, I saw the first guy again, a few paces behind me, walking in the same direction. He wasn't in a hurry, just walking at the same pace, keeping his distance. I looked back once, and he didn't seem to notice, but I felt like he was still there, following me. I knew by this time, it wasn't just a coincidence. I was being followed. I decided to break out into a run, wanting nothing more than to get to the safety of my home as quickly as possible. When I got to my apartment, I rushed upstairs and locked the door behind me. I stood by the window, trying to shake off the weird feeling, but as I peeked down at the street below, I saw something that made my heart race. A black SUV pulled up slowly in front of my building, then just stopped. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew it was there for a reason. I knew it had something to do with what had been happening, the puzzles. Asterisk, I freaking knew it was something illegal. Asterisk, I thought to myself. Asterisk, probably the FBI, or something. Asterisk. That, I heard a knock at the door. Just two, firm knocks. I peered through the peephole. Two men in suits stood outside, staring at the door like they knew I was watching. I froze in fear, unsure of what to do. They didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. I ignored it, hoping they would just go away. But then it happened again. A few hours later, another knock, same two men. I didn't dare look through the peephole again, but I could hear their footsteps outside. Every few hours, the knocks would come, always the same. No words. No warning. Just the sound of knuckles against wood. I began to realize by this point, they weren't leaving, and I wasn't getting out of this. I called out of work the next couple of days, not wanting to go outside. The SUV had not moved, and I didn't want to confront whatever was waiting for me out there. Days went by, and the food supply in my apartment began to dwindle. It was also the end of the weekend, and I knew I couldn't call out more days at work. Knowing I had no choice but to go outside, I left my apartment. As soon as I reached the sidewalk, I saw them. The two men in suits, the same ones who'd been following me, were stepping out of the black SUV. They moved toward me with purpose, their expressions unreadable. I froze, my blood running cold. One of them spoke first, his voice flat and direct. "We need you to come with us." My heart started to race, and I could feel a lump forming in my throat and tears welling up in my eyes. The panic hit me like a wave. I opened my mouth to protest, but all I could manage was a stammer. I didn't do anything. You've got the wrong person." "I don't." Before I could get another word out, one of them raised a hand, cutting me off. "Relax," he said, his tone calm but insistent. "You're not in any trouble. We're the ones you've been interacting with. Again, we need you to come with us. I assure you, you're not in any danger." I don't know why, but I believed him. Maybe it was the calmness in his voice, the way he seemed so sure of himself, or maybe it was the curiosity slowing building inside of me, eager to finally get the answers I had been so desperate to find. Without a word, I nodded. The man didn't hesitate. He motioned for me to follow, and I did, stepping toward the black SUV. He opened the door for me, and I climbed into the back seat. Once I slid into the back seat, one of the men handed me an eye cover, one of those sleep masks, and a pair of headphones. The music in the headphones was soft, classical, but the gesture felt more like an instruction than a suggestion. He didn't ask if I was okay with it. He just handed them to me, and before I could say anything, he spoke again, calm as ever. "It's just our policy, as a precaution," he assured me. "You won't be wearing them long." At that point, I figured I was already too far in, so I didn't hesitate. I put the mask on first, then the headphones. The classical music began to filter in, smooth and steady. My mind was still racing, but I saw through what they were doing. Classical music, with its intricate, layered structure, was meant to confuse my senses. It's strange how sound plays a crucial role in helping your brain orient itself. The way your ears pick up cues from your surroundings and allow you to determine direction, even without seeing. By flooding my senses with music, they were throwing off my internal compass, blocking my ability to track where we were going. I could feel the change in the car's movement, starting, stopping, turning, but the music kept my mind from getting a clear fix on it. The car came to a stop, and I felt one of the men grab my forearm. He guided me out of the car, and we started walking. The ground beneath me was hard, and I knew we were outside. The ground shifted from concrete to carpet, and the air around me shifted, and I knew we had entered a building. Eventually, we reached what I recognized as an elevator. The elevator started moving upward, and went on for a long time, way longer than I expected, before it finally stopped. They led me out of the elevator, and we kept walking. By this time, I was freaking out inside. I started to wonder if they were going to kill me. Maybe they brought me up to the roof and were going to throw me off. But just as I started thinking about making a run for it, they removed my mask and headphones. I found myself standing in a huge, upscale penthouse. It was far beyond anything I'd ever seen in person. Everything about it screamed extreme wealth. The floors were polished marble. Shelves lined the walls, filled with artwork, old books, and other expensive-looking things I couldn't even name. A large chandelier hung from the ceiling, and dark red curtains covered every window, blocking out any chance of seeing the outside or getting a clue about where I was. This seemed intentional to me, another measure to block out any chance of me pinpointing where this was location against the cityscape. The men who had been with me since the SUV now positioned themselves by the door and against the wall, standing still, like statues. Their presence was unnerving in its own right, but I couldn't focus on them for long. At the far end of the room, an eccentric older man was sitting in a plush chair. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his graying hair wild, and his eyes sharp, almost like he was studying me as I stood there. With a slow, deliberate motion, he gestured for me to come closer. Come in, he said, excitedly. I hesitated for a moment, but there didn't seem to be a choice. I walked towards him, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, wondering what exactly I had just stepped into. The man in the chair had a completely different vibe than the others. While the suited men were cold, reserved, and businesslike, he was eccentric, almost childlike in his enthusiasm. His eyes sparkled as he looked at me, his smile wide, and his voice lilted with excitement. "Well, well, well. The young puzzle solver," he said, his tone full of pride. "You cracked the code. I must say, I had my doubts, but I've never been so impressed. You're something special." His hands clapped together with exaggerated flair, almost as if he were putting on a performance. He spoke in a way that was over the top, with a showmanship that felt deliberate. I didn't know how to respond at first. His energy was contagious, and a part of me felt swept up in it. "Thanks," I muttered, unsure of what else to say. He laughed and waved his hand. "No need for modesty. You've done something most people could never even dream of. Tell me, how does it feel to know you've cracked something so far-reaching, so elusive asterisk?" I could barely keep up with his enthusiasm. "I don't really know yet. I mean, everything's been weird." Yes, of course," he said with a dismissive wave. "But let's not focus on the strange bits, HM? You're here now, and I think we can make this night something memorable." He stood up and motioned to a nearby table. "Come, let's eat. After all, you've earned it." He led me to a long, dark cherry wood table set for two. The men in suits stood to the side, almost blending into the background, and the air filled with the scent of something mouth-watering. I couldn't help but sit, now completely intrigued by what was unfolding. The dinner was beyond anything I could have imagined. First, a delicate lobster bisque, served with a touch of cream and a dash of truffle oil, smooth and rich. Then, seared foie gras, paired with a sweet fig reduction and a thin slice of toasted brioche. Next came a Wagyu beef steak, perfectly marbled, grilled to a perfect medium rare, and topped with a tangy balsamic glaze. The sides were simple but divine, roasted heirloom carrots and a creamy potato puree that melted in your mouth. For dessert, a small but exquisite dark chocolate soufflé, with a raspberry coulis drizzled on the side, rich and bittersweet. The meal was decadent, the best meal I had ever had, as a matter of fact. Far better than the cheap takeout I was accustomed to. By the time I finished, I felt both relaxed and almost entranced by how perfect everything had been. The man sat back in his chair, watching me closely, seemingly pleased with the effect his dinner had. "Good, isn't it?" he asked, a smile on his face. "Yeah, it's incredible," I said, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. The whole evening, the food, the place, it was all so surreal, but I was enjoying every second of it. As I leaned back in my chair, digesting both the meal and everything that had happened, the man stood up with a flourish. He returned to a side table and pulled out two perfectly banded stacks of cash, $10,000 each, setting them down in front of me. "A token of appreciation for your work," he said, patting me on the back in a fatherly manner. "You did well, my brilliant young friend." I couldn't help but smile, the weight of the cash in front of me almost too much to process. He handled it like it was nothing to him, pocket change, but to me, this was life-changing. Then, he lowered his voice slightly, and I noticed a sudden change in his demeanor. "But there's more, of course. We've got something else in mind for you." He slid the cash aside and leaned in slightly. "There's another puzzle we need cracked, one that's been eluding us for a long time. My associates and I have tried everything. But you've got a gift. The way you think, the way you approach things. It's rare. We're offering you a sum of money, far more than what you see here, to crack this final puzzle for us." I sat there, processing his words. The idea of taking on another puzzle, especially one that had stumped them for so long, was tempting. The challenge, the allure of something bigger. I couldn't resist. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I'll do it." He smiled widely, pleased. "Good. We'll be in touch soon," he said, tapping me on the shoulder like I was a good child who had just earned his reward. "Enjoy your time here. And remember, there is a lot more where that came from." The weight of his words settled in as I sat there, staring at the stacks of cash in front of me. The men drove me home, the pockets of cash heavy in my jacket. For several days, I heard nothing. All I could do was wait. I spent the days trying to distract myself, but the thought of that night and the possibility of making more money was all I could think of. After a few days, the SUV parked outside of my apartment. I didn't have to think twice, I knew exactly what it meant. I approached the SUV with a mixture of anticipation and excitement. The men were sitting in the vehicle, watching me, and as soon as I reached the door, one of them got out and opened it for me. I could hardly keep the smile from my face. "Hey, good to see you guys," I said, trying to sound casual, but my nerves were all over the place. The man didn't respond. He just handed me the same eye cover and headphones from before, like it was routine now. I didn't hesitate this time. I knew what was coming. I put them on without a word. The classical music started up again, and the world outside was blocked off. The drive was shorter this time, though. The time seemed to pass quickly, but I still had no idea where we were going. The car finally stopped, and one of the men gently guided me out. We went up a set of stairs, and then they directed me into a chair. It wasn't until I was sitting there that I started to piece things together. I recognized the muffled vibrations that hinted we were moving. When the plane finally took off, the sensation of the ground disappearing beneath me confirmed it. We were in the air. I had no idea where they were taking me, but the idea of being on a plane made it feel more serious, more real. After a while, the men removed my eye cover and headphones. I blinked, adjusting to the light, and I looked around. I was in a small, though upscale, private jet, high in the sky. The flight attendants passed by, glancing at me briefly, but no one said anything. We were in the air for some time before we started descending. Once we landed, the men quickly replaced the eye cover and headphones. The plane taxied for a while, and then we were driving again. I was starting understanding that this was a much bigger operation than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just some bored rich guy. Whatever he wanted me to do, it must mean something, to go through all of this trouble and expense. When the car stopped, I was led outside. The sun was blinding after being in the dark for so long, and the air smelled fresh, like grass and earth. I squinted and looked around. There was a huge stretch of open land, fields of tall grass and rolling hills, and scattered rocks in the distance. It felt isolated, almost untouched. In front of me was the building. A massive, old stone structure that looked like a giant abandoned Catholic church. The outside was worn and weathered, dark stone covered with ivy. They led me up the stairs and through the large wooden doors. The moment we stepped inside, it felt like a completely different world. The place was huge. The stone walls were hidden behind rich tapestries and fancy curtains. The floors were shiny marble, and there were elegant light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. The building had been renovated into looking like a luxury hotel. The cold, old exterior was just a mask for what was inside. There were people in the room, dressed in dark suits, standing around talking quietly. The man from before, the one I met in the penthouse, spotted me immediately. His face lit up. "Ah, there he is," he said, sounding excited. "Welcome. Welcome to our little hideaway." I looked around, trying to take everything in. The people here weren't saying much, but their eyes were all on me. "Sorry for all of the trouble, my boy," he continued, "never can be too careful. But we are glad you are here. The others have so been looking forward to meeting you, and we have been waiting anxiously for your arrival so that we may finally get started." "Get started on what, exactly?" I asked, hesitantly. "Only the mystery of all mysteries. The puzzle to conquer all puzzles. The code to crack all codes." He eagerly continued, growing more animated. "For decades, my associates and I have been trying to crack it." The man's expression turned serious as he motioned for me to sit. "What we have for you," he said slowly, "is something far more intricate than what you've done before. It's an old puzzle, something that's been around for centuries, and no one has been able to crack it, not yet." He stood up and walked over to a large table, pulling out a thick, old manuscript. The pages were yellowed with age, edges frayed, and it had that distinct, musty smell. As he opened it, he laid out a page in front of me. The writing was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, an ancient script that looked both familiar and foreign at the same time. The symbols were intricate, almost flowing into one another, forming shapes and patterns. The manuscript was discovered in a remote monastery in Syria, he continued. It's believed to have been written by a group who guarded advanced knowledge. The puzzle within these pages has baffled historians and cryptographers for hundreds of years, but it's more than just a code. It's a key to something much greater. I looked down at the page, my mind immediately grappling with the complexity of the symbols. Some of the symbols resembled ancient languages, like Sumerian or Old Latin, but others were completely alien. There were no obvious clues, no easy cipher to break. It was as if the puzzle was designed to resist anyone trying to solve it, to keep its secrets locked away. The first part is a sequence of symbols, he explained, but the order is hidden within the layout itself. The shapes are not random, they're encoded in the positions on the page, the angles of the symbols, even the spacing between them. You need to figure out not only what each symbol means, but how they fit together. It's a multi-layered puzzle. Some of the symbols are phonetic, others are mathematical, and some seem to be a form of astronomical calculation. I ran my fingers over the page, trying to take it all in. There was a section of what appeared to be a star chart, but the constellations were different from any I knew. The stars didn't match up with anything in modern astronomy. Below it was a set of numbers, but they were written in an unfamiliar script, with some numbers missing or crossed out, as if they were part of a sequence but intentionally obscured. It's not just about deciphering a code, he said, leaning in closer, it's about understanding what's been hidden in plain sight for centuries. The authors were secretive for a reason. The puzzle points to something that's been buried, something powerful. I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The online puzzles had been complicated, sure, but this was on a whole different level. He continued. There have been plenty before you who have tried. We posted the test online hoping to find someone different, someone who thinks outside of the box. If you can't solve it, we will still be grateful for your efforts, but we hope that you can. After being shown to a spacious bedroom, I was left alone, where I stayed for days. They brought me meals 3 times a day, each one better than the last, but none of it mattered. All I could think about was solving the puzzle and whatever prize would surely await me at the end. The first few days were a blur. I tried to immerse myself in the manuscript, to understand the symbols, but it felt like grasping at smoke. The more I looked at it, the more I became convinced that I was missing something. I tried everything, decoding the symbols like a cipher, rearranging the pages, reading through old books on Sumerian, testing out every possible method I knew. But every time I thought I had made progress, something would trip me up. I'd hit a dead end, and the frustration would mount. Then, on the 4th day, I noticed something. I was staring at the star chart again, trying to make sense of the constellations, when I realized that one of the symbols, the one that had been throwing me off for so long, was identical to an old alchemical symbol I had seen once in a book. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it was there. I started to see other symbols like it, symbols I recognized from forgotten corners of my education. Symbols I had studied in obscure texts, long-forgotten works on ancient mathematics and astrology. It wasn't just a code, it was a blending of disciplines. The puzzle wasn't meant to be solved in one way, it had layers, and I had to peel them back one at a time. The sequence of symbols I had been staring at was tied to old astronomical charts, yes, but it was also linked to alchemical processes and ancient number theory. The order wasn't linear. I realized that some symbols were meant to be read backwards, others were mirrored, and some only made sense when connected to physical measurements, things like the angle of the stars at certain times, or the ratios of certain numbers when translated into geometric shapes. I started to sketch out everything I saw, patterns, connections, different sequences. I took out a ruler, a protractor, and even a compass I found in the drawer. Every angle, every measurement mattered. It was like putting together a puzzle within a puzzle. Each discovery was a small victory, but with each piece I connected, I felt closer to the answer. It was an exhausting process, my mind spun, and my eyes blurred from staring too long, but eventually, it all started to make sense. As I continued to work through the manuscript, something finally clicked. After days of staring at the symbols, the numbers, and the strange geometric patterns, I realized this wasn't just an abstract puzzle. It was a recipe, an ancient formula, disguised as a code. The symbols, the shapes, the constellations, they all were steps in a process that seemed to require both precise ingredients and specific actions. I began to break it down piece by piece. The sequence of symbols represented different elements, each symbol standing for a specific ingredient, almost like a shopping list. Some ingredients were rare and complex, others were simpler, but they all had to be combined in precise amounts. The measurements weren't in normal units like cups or grams, but in older, forgotten measurements. Each symbol wasn't just an abstract clue, it was a direction for what to do next, a set of instructions. The patterns I'd been staring at were steps in a very specific, detailed process. A ritual. With the ingredients and directions laid out in front of me, everything clicked into place. My heart raced as the solution unfolded in my mind. It was all so clear now. I burst out of the room, practically shouting, "Eureka!" The words felt good to say, like I'd been waiting for this moment for my entire life, and now it was here. I had cracked it. The men in the room froze. Their eyes widened, and a few even stood up. I could see the disbelief in their faces, mixed with something like awe. I'd done it. They gathered around me, silent, all attention focused on me as I began to explain my findings, piece by piece. They didn't interrupt. They didn't speak, just watched, listening intently. It was clear they had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the code was finally broken. A mixture of shock and admiration was written across their faces. No one had expected me to actually pull it off. As I laid out the steps in the order I had deciphered, I watched their expressions shift. They seemed impressed, but there was something else there, something deeper. Maybe it was excitement, maybe fear. But there was no mistaking it. They knew that the answer I had found was something monumental, something they'd been waiting for, hoping for. One of the men broke the silence, his voice sharp and urgent. "We must get started right away. Let's not waste any time." His words were like a spark that set the room into motion. Suddenly, they were all up and moving, speaking in quick, hushed tones, making phone calls, pulling out their phones to send messages, and scribbling things on scraps of paper. It was like they had been waiting for this moment their whole lives, and now they were ready to execute it without hesitation. I stood there, frozen for a moment, watching them move with a frantic, almost desperate sense of purpose. Wait, I thought, suddenly gripped by doubt. Are they really going to try this? I'd been so focused on solving the puzzle that I hadn't even considered what this might mean. What were they planning to do with this knowledge? Was it just a game to them, or was something much more unfolding right before my eyes? I glanced around at the men, who were now deep in conversation with others on the phone, giving quick orders, moving with a sense of urgency. My mind raced. Was I in over my head? Was this all really happening? And what exactly were these instructions for that I'd helped them decode? I trembled slightly as I tried to take it all in. I wanted to ask more questions, but something told me it was too late for that. The wheels were already in motion. I walked up to the penthouse man, feeling out of place amidst the chaos. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "Do I get paid or something?" My voice came out more sarcastic than I intended, but I couldn't help it. After everything, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the promise of cash seemed like a safe bet. He turned to me, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Money?" he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You've got it. Consider that handled." His laugh was light, almost dismissive, like the idea of money was a trivial detail. "But what you really get," his tone shifted, his eyes gleaming with a kind of fervor that sent a chill down my spine. "What you really get is something far more valuable than money." I stared at him, unsure if I liked where this was going. "And that is?" He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping as if he were sharing a secret meant only for me. "A front row seat, my boy. A front row seat to something far bigger than you could ever imagine." I didn't know how to respond. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Far bigger than I could imagine? What did that even mean? Whatever it was, I wasn't sure I wanted to be this close to it. But before I could ask anything more, he turned back to the others, his focus already elsewhere, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. But what could I do? I didn't even know where I was, and judging by the landscape, I was far away from anything, or anyone. I had no choice but to ride this out. Hours passed as strangers came and went, carrying crates, bags, and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. Nobody explained anything to me, and I was too nervous to ask. I just sat there, watching, trying to piece together what was happening as the preparations continued. Eventually, someone came to get me. I was led into a large room, and the sight stopped me in my tracks. The walls were paneled with sleek, black wood that absorbed the light, and the floor was made of polished black stone. The room was large and empty, except for a single table at the far end. But as large as it was, I felt claustrophobic. I felt like a cat being forced into a bathtub. I wasn't sure what was going to happen in that room, but I knew instinctually I didn't want to go in. The men began filing in, one by one. This time, there were no conversations, no pleasantries. They moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. Someone walked to the center of the room holding a stack of small black boxes. One by one, he handed a box to each man. Nobody said a word. I watched, heart pounding, body sweating, as they opened their boxes. Inside, each held a carefully folded red robe. Without hesitation, they all removed the robes and began putting them on, the vibrant red contrasting sharply with the blackness of the room. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't just some secret government project, or some eccentric hobby for rich people. Was this some sort of cult? Some kind of cult for rich guys, who were now preparing to perform some ritual that I had unknowingly helped them bring to life. My mind was racing, every fiber of my body screaming at me to leave, to make a run for it, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some intellectual game or a test for an intelligence agency candidates. This was something far darker. The ritual began with low, rhythmic chanting. The words were guttural and unfamiliar, their cadence unnatural, like something pulled from an ancient nightmare. The men moved in perfect unison, following my instructions, ingredients carefully placed. The candle's flames began to shift unnaturally, bending and twisting as if being pulled by some unseen force. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. A swirling mass of smoke and fire erupted in the center of the circle. It grew rapidly, turning into something horrifying, a shape that defied logic. I stood, frozen, shocked at what I was seeing. Something impossible, otherworldly. An entity appeared in the center, through the flames. Its head was a mix between that of a wolf and a goat, twisted and grotesque, its fiery eyes glowing. The rest of its body was covered in coarse, dark hair, with inverted legs like those of some nightmarish demon. The room filled with the stench of rotten burning, so overpowering it made my stomach churn. I felt hands grab me from behind. Two of the men dragged me forward, their grips like iron. "What are you doing? Let me go." I screamed, thrashing and kicking, but they held me tight, dragging me toward the creature. Tears streamed down my face as panic overwhelmed me. One of the robed men stepped forward and addressed the entity, his voice steady and reverent. "Oh, mighty Namtaru, we resurrect you, and bring you a brilliant mind and a strong body for you to possess. Accept this offering and bestow upon us your power." The entity moved closer, its massive, clawed hands reaching out toward me. I could feel its heat, its presence, something ancient and evil pressing against my soul. In pure primal fear, I began to shout out any prayer I could remember from childhood, beg to Jesus, God, anyone. The smell of decay and sulfur was suffocating. Its hands landed on my face, searing my skin with unbearable pain. I screamed, louder than I ever had in my life, the pain consuming everything. And then darkness. I woke up in my apartment. Everything was eerily normal, as if none of it had happened. My head throbbed, but I was alive. I ran to the mirror, finding my face to look completely normal. I looked around, and that's when I saw the several briefcases, neatly stacked by the door. I opened the first one to find it stuffed with cash, crisp bills packed tightly together. I never heard from any of them again. Not a phone call, not a letter, no SUV lingering outside my apartment. The money, though, it was real. It changed everything. I paid off my debts, moved into a better apartment, and started living a life I never thought possible. For a while, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd come out of all this ahead. Several years went by before they started, the blackouts. At first, they were small. I'd wake up on the couch, unsure how I got there. I chalked it up to stress, maybe exhaustion catching up with me. But then it got worse. Much worse. I started losing hours, even a full day once. Sometimes I'd be out running errands, grocery shopping, walking through the park, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed, with no memory of how I got there. My shoes would still be on, my wallet still in my pocket. Other times, I'd wake up in strange places, an alley, a park bench. I have no memory of the gaps, and no idea what I do during them. I've been asking myself the questions I'd been avoiding since the ritual. What did they do to me? What did I help them unleash? And, most importantly, what is happening to me now? I don't know what to do next. But the blackouts have been getting worse. And I'm missing more and more time.